Hello, Brass Methods. I hope you all are doing well as we head towards the end of this semester. Today, we are going to talk about instrument repair. We wanted to bring in an expert on the topic, so I got in contact with the repair guy who helped me out a lot during my first years of teaching. So we're really excited to be joined by Rich Culp today. So, hey, Rich, can you start by telling us a quick bit about your background in instrument repair?
Sure. Like most of you, I went to, or actually, I guess all of you, since this is a music major class, I went to music school and was planning on being a band director, and realized somewhere along the way that maybe that wasn't the best thing for me. So I ended up in the music retail field. Just started out selling instruments, and you know, worked my way up to a point where I was going into schools and being like a school service rep. Um, and a lot of what I learned was just kind of crash course. Here's a set of tools. You're going to go into a school. You're going to face some problems. Do the best you can to fix it. And along the way, I had some people that kind of gave me pointers, like our shop managers and our technicians and things, and other road guys that did that. But then about a year ago, we had an opening, a full-time opening in the repair shop with Gadsden Music, and they asked me if I would like to take that position, and I took them up on it. And so for the past year, I've been working full-time doing basically mostly just brass instruments. I've got a little bit of clarinet knowledge, just enough flute and saxophone knowledge to get myself in a lot of trouble. But most of what I've got knowledge-wise is very centralized around brass instruments. And I can't do everything, but I can do a lot of it. And like I said, a lot of it I learned just kind of on my own coming into band rooms like yours.
Yeah, great. We're really thankful to that you could give up some of your time today. Let's start with the basics, Repair 101. So when a student comes up to you and they say their instrument is broken, where do you start?
Well, the first thing I always did was I asked, well, what's going on with your instrument? You know, because depending on what they tell you is what the student tells you is wrong, or what they perceive as the problem will kind of guide you in the direction that you need to go to where you're looking for the problem on the instrument. And it's very just case by case basis. And it's rarely ever the exact same problem on every instrument. I mean, there are a few things that are similar, that are like certain, like with trumpets, you'll often have valve guides that have gotten dislodged and are not in the right position. The valves might be turned the wrong direction, things like that. Those are kind of common problems, but a lot of times it's something that's very specific to the individual.
Do you find that students can articulate that well, especially younger middle school students?
Well, there's a certain amount of interpretation that you have to make. They might be really vague. They might come up to you and say, my trombone sounds airy. Okay, well, let me take a look at it real quick and just see, like, the first thing I do is I look to see if the water key cork is sealing, things like that. And if I immediately see that there's nothing wrong with the instrument, then the next thing is, well, what are you doing with your embouchure? I try not to get into that too much because that's the teacher's job, but sometimes you can really narrow down the problem with the instrument by asking them what is your perceived issue with what's going on.
Okay. What are some of those most common issues on each of the brass instruments? I think you already hit on trumpet with the valve guides, but
That would be any piston instrument, trumpets, baritones that are piston, tubas that are piston. Any of those that have the piston valves all have valve guides. And what the valve guide does is it keeps the valve from spinning inside the casing, because the holes of the valves, which I know everybody has seen, have to line up perfectly with the holes that are in the valve casings. Otherwise, it won't play. So that's a pretty common problem. With trombones, most of the time you've got a slide issue, because the slides are very temperamental, and if one has taken a little bit of a knock or a ding or something like that, if there's even the smallest dent in a slide, it can cause real problems. All brass instruments share one thing, and that's a water key. And so a lot of times the cork will be degraded and you'll need to replace that, or the spring might have come off or something like that. Other issues that you find with brass instruments, trigger trombones, French horns that have string instead of mechanical linkage. the strings will come off. That's something that is a very valuable skill to have, is to know how to restring a rotary valve instrument, like a trombone trigger or the strung up French horns. And then other than that, just having a working knowledge of how all of the different instruments are put together. So like knowing the difference between a piston valve tuba and a rotary valve tuba, and how the two different mechanisms work, is really important when it comes to diagnosing what a problem with an instrument is. I hope that answered your question. I know it's kind of a broad approach to it, but it just really kind of depends on the instrument, and a lot of times that's something I know what we're going to talk about in a little bit, is also the brands of instruments can come into play when it comes to what issues you might face.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and talk about those brands. So as a repair tech, are there certain makes and models that you would prefer to see, or you'd never want to see a student purchase?
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt, there's definitely a black and white answer to that question. Um, the the instruments that you do want to see in your band room are the brand names that you have all come to know over your years of being in band. Brands like anything that's from the Conn-Selmer brand name, which would be King, Bach. Um, Even they have a few specialty brands like Yanagasawa saxophones, things like that. The Conn-Selmer mother company, all of their instruments are going to be really well made, for the exception of a couple, but they are not even making those anymore, so it's not a big deal. Yamaha. You cannot go wrong with Yamaha, no matter how you look at it. It is the number one most reliable instrument maker in the world. I mean, this is a company that makes everything from motorcycles to artificial hearts. So you know that they're going to be able to do the music thing really well. And if you haven't noticed, they make some of the finest pianos in the world too. Other brands, Jupiter makes a really fine product. I've always been a fan of their stuff. They're ever so slightly less priced than the other, like Conn-Selmer and Yamaha brands. So you can often get a really good value out of a Jupiter instrument. And then there are several other brands, like for flutes, Gemeinhardt makes a good product. And I'm not going to get into all the specialty brands, because we're kind of really sort of more talking about student level instruments than we are the finer things like Haynes flutes or Powell flutes or something like that. We're kind of still talking more about like what you would find on the student level. The instruments that you want to stay away from, and this list is actually probably longer than the list of brands that you should be okay with. And I don't want to offend anybody here, because we all start somewhere, and some people may still have a few of these instruments laying around. But I will just say, from a technician and a salesperson and a service person's point of view, you want to be able to put something in the kids' hands that not only they can be successful with, an instrument that is intonated properly, that plays correctly, that all these things to set the kids up for success, to make sure that it's not the instrument that's holding them back. These brands are ones that we as repair facilities cannot get parts for. They don't make replacement parts for these instruments. Therefore, they're not serviceable. And when you put an instrument in the hands of an 11-year-old and ask them to take care of it, it's like a rag doll. They get banged around. You have to have something that can be fixed. You want to stay away from brands like Mendini, Cecilio. There are a couple of Glory is another brand I've heard of. There are several brands out there that let's just put it to you this way: if you can find this instrument brand new online for less than $500, it should give you real pause. There's nothing that you can get brand new on the internet for less than $500 that's really going to set your kids up for success, and they're not going to be serviceable. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's kind of a hard
one. What kind of repairs can be done in the band room by the band director?
Well, it depends on the capabilities of the band director and how much they fiddled with instruments in their lifetime and whatnot, and that's going to be real subjective. with each individual band director. I've seen some band directors that have a real good knowledge of what's going on and a good working knowledge of the instruments, and they often can make repairs pretty well without there being much of an issue. And then I've seen a few band directors that really just don't understand how it works. Most of the time, you have to work with all band directors of all skill sets and just be able to help them out. For me anyway. So what I tell most young band directors, excuse me, apologize. What I tell most young band directors is, don't get in over your head. If you're looking at something that you've never dealt with before, just wait for somebody that knows what they're doing to tackle it. If you feel confident with your tools and your skill set, and it's something that you feel like that you can do without a problem, good. Go ahead and try it. Hopefully you've got a representative from some store that's coming out to take care of you once a week or something like that, so that if you do need help, it's less than a week away, let's hope. I think the one rule of thumb would be, try not to make any repairs unless it's an emergency. If you can afford to wait for somebody else to take a look at it, great. But you should definitely have a basic tool set in your band room to where you can make those last minute emergency repairs. Like if you're getting ready to go on for a concert and you've got a spring that pops off of a flute or a saxophone or something, you need a spring hook so that you can just throw the spring back on real quick, that sort of thing. But again, it's kind of subjective to each individual person.
Yeah, can you go into what tools band directors should have in their band room?
Yeah, I think that this is sort of you don't want to get in too crazy. I know you and I spoke right before we started the recording. There's a brand called Ferrees. It's a great asset for band directors. It's Ferrees, and they make all kinds of tools and things that you would need. In fact, they have, and I'm going to send you a link to this we talked about. They have 3 different tool kits that you can purchase that are pre-made. One's an economy kit, one's a standard kit, and one's like a Go Crazy Deluxe kit that I don't see anybody really needing because it's over $1,000, and there's a bunch of stuff in there that you probably never use. But the standard kit would be great for band rooms, and it includes things like small screwdrivers to make small adjustments and repairs for like pivot screws on saxophones, clarinets, flutes, that whole family. It'll have things like replacement pads for clarinets and saxophones. It'll have cork. It'll have cork cement. It'll have hot glue, a little oil lamp to heat the hot glue up because we're not allowed to have torches in schools. Things like that. It's a good little kit to have. As far as just naming off a few of the tools that you would want to have, you would want to have a small screwdriver set, a couple of Allen wrench sets that you can get from a hardware store, because a lot of the screws that are used to put tubas together are often Allen wrench heads, and you never know if it's going to be standard or metric, so you want to get one of each. You're going to want a rawhide mallet, like the one that you used to play with the chimes with. Those are great for when you've got stubborn things like valve caps. The valve caps, top and bottom, can often be stubborn, and with just a little bit of, like you're opening the mayonnaise jar, just kind of tap it on the lid. You do the same thing with those to get those freed up with the rawhide hammer. Trying to think of what else. Spring hook. Okay, spring hook is something, they make these specific little spring hooks from the tool companies that you can get, and they are really, really, really handy. But believe it or not, you can use a really small little crochet hook as well. Those, if you've got that at home, that works as well. Trying to think if there's anything else. I know there's probably got to be several other tools that would be helpful, but I'm not thinking of anything right now. And
in terms of mouthpiece pullers, I know for brass instruments, that's something that a lot of band rooms have. Do you prefer one type over the other?
Well, that's kind of a hard question to answer, because there's one that's called the Bobcat. That's kind of the one that everybody uses. It's the most affordable. I think they're about $50, something like that. It will pull most mouthpieces. It will not pull all mouthpieces. And it also will not pull mouthpieces that are extremely stuck. Like if they're just so stuck that that they're just not going to move, then that mouthpiece puller won't work on that either. But for most mouthpiece situations, that's the one you want, the Bobcat. They make some other ones that are a little more involved. One of them even kind of looks like a medieval torture device. I still don't understand that one. I just leave it in the box. But the other ways that you can get mouthpieces loose is using penetrating oil. I don't suggest WD-40 because it's got a lot of fumes to it, and that's never any fun. They make penetrating oil that you can get that's more like a gear type of oil. You can get it on that Fereeze website that I spoke of also. But using a combination of penetrating oil and a little bit of heat will also help break a mouthpiece loose as well. What you never want to do is take pliers to anything. Anytime that you start taking pliers to something that's stuck, you're going to make it worse almost always.
Right. And in terms of using the mouthpiece puller, and really a lot of the tools, I'll go ahead and say, as and piggyback off of you, as a young band director, really just going and YouTubing like Bobcat mouthpiece puller if you're not exactly sure how to do it. And as a brass player, I didn't get my mouthpiece stuck often, but I didn't feel completely comfortable using one. So I still let the YouTube video run and just watch it and follow along just to make sure I was doing it right the first few times. And after you get it a few times, you can quickly determine, okay, this is going to work or this isn't going to work. And let me put this in the pile for Rich that he can look at later.
Yeah. And you usually figure it out pretty quickly if you can get it or not. And there's, I mean, I even working in the repair shop, I've had a lot of instruments come across my bench that have mouthpieces that are so stuck that I can't even get them out with a Bobcat. It takes something else. There's been a couple where I've had to completely remove the lead pipe off of the instrument and force the mouthpiece out from the other end. Like I have to take the mouthpiece receiver off, everything. And that's major work. Anytime that you've got something that big, that's automatically a $7,500 repair right there. Anytime that you have to go through something like that.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about tools for the band room. Are there any tools and items that you should keep on you as a band director for like road performance trips or anything like that? I know I would keep a book bag and kind of just had a bunch of things in there, but what would you suggest that we should always carry with us?
Again, I'm going to refer to that toolkit that I told you about because that they've designed that to have exactly what you would need. The little economy kit they have, which I think is only a couple of $100, that has everything that you would really need if something happens while you're out at an event. Now, also, I want to make one caveat here is that most of these little repair kits are going to be very woodwind oriented with the tools and the parts and the things that they put in there, like cork and pads and cement and all this stuff. You're never going to see any of that for a brass instrument. And the reason why is because brass instruments are just a bit more resilient when it comes to things like that than woodwind instruments are. I spent many years, if you remember, in the warm-up room at MPA, and inevitably the one thing that I always come across is that for every 10 people that come up to you with an issue, 9 of them are woodwind players. The brass players, by the time they get to a performance, most of the time they've already got their instrument kind of, settled out. Everything's fine. They don't have to worry about much. Every now and then you'll have a problem like a rotary valve on a French horn that gets stuck or something like that, something weird. But for the most part, it's going to be leaky saxophones, things like that. So most of the toolkits that you find and most of the tools that you'll want to take with you on the road are going to be very woodwind oriented. The Bobcat mouthpiece puller is great for brass instruments. I always took lots of lubricant. Like I'll take a couple of different types of valve oil, trombone slide grease, slide grease for the tuning slides. I'll take the little screwdriver set, maybe a small little plier set, and that's really just, again, that's going to be more for woodwind stuff than brass stuff. But I mean, you don't want to. Having a book bag with stuff in it's great, but you also don't want to carry around a 50-pound bag all day long. So just don't overthink it. That little toolkit that you can buy, you could even leave that on the bus unless you have a problem. So it's not something that you necessarily have to carry around with you. I think that those are great ideas. Um, Otherwise, you just kind of have to, you know, the first couple of times that you leave the school with your group and go somewhere, it'll be pretty apparent to you what your kids' needs are. You know, I think with you, your kids were really good about cleaning their own instruments, but they would when they would take the valves apart, they would have a hard time getting the parts of the valve back together, and that's something that unfortunately you and I can't necessarily do right this second. But maybe later down the road, I can get a piston valve and take it apart and show you how all the different parts work and all that stuff. But that's something, having a working knowledge of how all that stuff's put together can really be beneficial in a situation like what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So now talking about maintenance to help avoid repairs, um, what are some typical instrument maintenance practices that band directors can do in a heterogeneous band class? Are there some ways that you've seen some band directors address class-wide maintenance that are better than others?
Yes. Well, I think that you hit the nail on the head. You have to address it. I think that a lot of band directors maybe didn't really get much of experience themselves with maintaining instruments as they came through their education, and so they don't necessarily feel comfortable passing that on because maybe they don't feel like they know. The one rule of thumb is a clean horn is a happy horn. So if you can go through the process of teaching your kids or your students how to keep not only routine daily maintenance cleaning, just wiping them down when you're done using them, to once a month, once every other month or something like that, actually giving the instrument a bath. That goes a long way for keeping the repairman from having to take your instrument to the repair shop for 2 weeks to get it fixed. The other thing, other than keeping it clean, is just being mindful of what you're doing with your instrument. Sometimes you don't think about it, but if you set it down on your chair and walk away to go get a drink of water to use the restroom or something, and somebody accidentally knocks your instrument off your chair, that can cause damage that can keep your instrument from working correctly. Or if you accidentally bump into a door, if you're trying to go outside for band practice and the door shuts and you don't realize it's shutting, even a little knock like that, the little second valve slide on a trumpet that sticks out like this. If you hit that and it does this, the second valve won't work because it binds all that stuff up. And so you have to be very careful, be mindful of where your instrument is or what you're doing with it. I rarely ever walk off and leave my instrument sitting anywhere by itself. Rarely ever, because you run into the problems of it accidentally getting stepped on, kicked, getting somebody will pick it up thinking it's theirs and go, oops, that's not mine. And then they can set it back down and not be as gentle as you are with your instrument. And now you've got a problem that somebody else created. So really being mindful of where your instrument is and what you're doing with it, and keeping the knocks and dents and bumps and all that stuff from happening will really go a really long way with keeping the repairman away.
Absolutely. And I think as a middle school band director, it's so important because you're building that foundation for the student. You're building that foundation of, okay, this is what I need to do for instrument maintenance. This is how I take care of it. And especially if you're sharing instruments, I think my euphoniums were used in every class.
Yep.
By a different kid. And it was really hard to keep those working and all of that because you had younger kids who just weren't as careful as some of the older ones.
Yep, that's not something that you can teach an 11-year-old right off the bat. You can instruct them, but you also have to kind of keep an eye on them. And I think that a lot of times just making sure that the kids not only know what to do with it, but you've got to hold them accountable as a band director too, because unfortunately kids are sneaky. So that when they're in front of you is one thing, but when they're goofing off in the instrument room, that's something completely different. And that's something that I know a lot of younger band directors struggle with, is not just what to tell the kids, but also how to manage the kids. And so you're absolutely right. When it comes to middle school, that's when it's most important to really get a hold of them and make them understand that this saxophone that your mother has gotten for you, in a lot of cases, is over $2,000, and she had to work really hard to afford this saxophone for you to play. So please don't drop it. So that's really kind of it.
Right. And in terms of oiling valves, how often should that be done? Is there a general rule of thumb?
It's going to depend on the routine maintenance of the instrument. If the instrument is clean, is well maintained, then and it's a good quality instrument, uh, re- more than likely you're going to need to oil the valves every 2 or 3 days, something like that. Um, kind of the same for trombone slides. Although I'm going to put a shameless plug out there. Not that I have any stake in the company, but I started using a brand of slide lubricant called Slido Mix a few years ago, and that stuff is so good. As long as you keep your slide clean, that stuff is so good that I only have to put it on like once every week or two. That's how good it is.
Okay, good. You hit on this a little bit already about bathing brass instruments. And I think I know your answer, but should band directors instruct students in the process of bathing instruments, and should bathing instruments be done at the school, at home, or just let the music shop do it?
I would say the short answer is all of the above. For doing it first in the band room, so teaching them how to do it, yes. For the most part, yes. Teaching how, having a day where you bring in little kiddie pools and show them how to do it, for one for each instrument, great. I think that's a great idea. And then maybe I don't know about as far as like making them take their instruments home once a month and give it a bath at home. I don't know if that's something that's really feasible for most people, but it's not a bad idea either, because it's just going to make everybody's life that much better. The one thing that I would want to say is make sure that if when you're teaching your students how to take instruments apart, that you pay attention to how they come apart. Make sure that you locate on valve instruments where the number for each valve is, like, because each valve is going to be stamped with a number. Now, I do want to back up just a little bit. I do think that there is one group of instruments that maybe you don't want students, especially 11-year-olds, taking apart and giving a bath, and that's a rotary valve instrument. I think that the rotary valve, French horns, and tubas, um, and trombones with triggers, I really think that those should probably be left to the shop to clean, to do, because they're quite a bit trickier. And a lot of times rotary valves are stamped funny. Like, it's like on a 3-valve trumpet, they're always stamped 1, 2, 3. There's not really any other way to do it. But if I don't know if you can see in the background, but I have a let's see, can we see that?
Yeah.
I have a rotary valve tuba back there, that is a 5-valve instrument. And the first time I took it apart, I didn't pay much attention because the valves were stamped 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What I didn't realize is that the order in which they come out is 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so when I put the horn back together, all of a sudden nothing played correctly. And I couldn't figure out why. And it's because I had the 5th valve and the 4th valve. Well, basically they were all shifted down one. They're in the wrong place. And so that's, if you don't pay attention to how the valves come out, especially with rotary valves, you can get yourself into trouble.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off you, so they can learn from some of my mistakes, and things I learned after the first time doing this in my classroom. I think one, giving the students a like step-by-step guide on how to do it was key. The first day we did it, we practiced without any water, and we just took everything apart, following the guide, and then we were able to put it back together. So I knew that they knew how to do this before we added the water element. I also learned, as you mentioned, that my 6th graders had trouble remembering the order and things like that, and which tubes go where. So I learned to kind of color code things with either colored rubber bands or colored water balloons or something, or animal balloons or something.
Yeah.
Just to give the kids, okay, this was green and this was green, so make sure the greens go back together, type of thing.
Yeah, that's a good one. It can get really tricky too, because some tubas, the 1st valve and the 3rd valve, are identical, and a lot of times they'll be stamped 1 and 1. Euphoniums, a lot of times the 1st valve tuning slide and the 3rd valve tuning slide are identical, and so while they can be put interchanged in one place or the other, they often work better in one position or the other. And so it's really good to, like you said, to to pay really close attention to how they come apart. It's not even a bad idea to take pictures as you're doing it, especially on some of the instruments that have more parts.
Hmm. And the only other thing that I would suggest on bathing instruments, I think the biggest mistake, if you just let them go home and haven't done it before, is using too hot of water on brass instruments. That will take
Absolutely.
the lacquer right off. I take a hot bath. Doesn't my trumpet want a hot bath? Well, okay, hold on.
Right.
Probably not.
Yeah, no, lukewarm water is good, and just use Dawn, just good old fashioned, because that's the best degreaser out there. That's the best. Just it doesn't even have to be a bunch of Dawn. Just use just a little bit, just enough to make the water mildly soapy. And then you always want to rinse it really good. Make sure there's no soap on it, inside or out, when you're done. With instruments like if you can, on all of them, I would let them air dry overnight before you put them back together, especially trombones, because if you get moisture between the outer slide and the inner slide, it can actually create friction, and it'll feel like there's a problem with the slide when it's actually just wet and it just needs to be dry. So especially trombones, I'll let them air dry overnight. Trombone slides are something that we didn't really talk too much about, except for I just mentioned how really temperamental they are. Whenever you're giving a trombone a bath, you want to be, it's like surgery. You want to be very, very, very careful with both the inner and outer slides, because if they do get even the slightest bit out of line, you're gonna have a problem with the way the horn plays. So you don't want to, if you're taking the outer slide off of the inner slide, that inner slide is very, very, very flimsy, and you want to be very careful with that.
Yeah. And what are some summer maintenance things that we can do, particularly to prevent frozen valves?
Well, the number one thing, and this is actually going to finish up your last question, is every single brass instrument should go to the shop every single summer to be professionally cleaned. And the reason why is because not only the shop, like the shop we have at Gadsden Music, we have what's called an ultrasonic cleaning machine. And what that is it's basically just a mild soapy mixture with a just ever so slight acidic compound in it. And when I say that, like, I can put my hands down in this, and it's not like it's going to rot my skin off my arms or anything like that. It's very, very, very mild acid that's in this bath. But what it does is it's got an agitator that agitates the water at a really high frequency. And what that does is it breaks all the dirt loose on the inside of the instrument that your just usual bath that you give it every month is not going to get to. And as a part of that service, the ultrasonic service, they also go through and make sure that your horn is working perfectly from one end to the other. And then, so that's going to be replacing all the valve felts, replacing all of the water key corks, replacing all of the strings for French horns and that sort of thing. It basically puts your instrument back at 100% playing ability, and that's something that is absolutely necessary every single summer. Now, as because you and I have done this in the past, where you've sent your instruments in over the summer. With school instruments, the tubas, the euphoniums, the French horns, those instruments that the school owns, if your school can afford it, you want to send them in every summer. A lot of times the school systems don't have enough money to do that, and so then you might want to get into a rotation where you're sending the tubas every other year, euphoniums every other year, something like that. But making sure that they get the proper maintenance over the summer is really important. Now, to answer your most recent question, which is what can I do for summer maintenance? First and foremost, if you can't afford to send it in, and by the way, these prices on those cleanings, those ultrasonic cleanings, I think the trumpet is just $70, so it's really not that bad. But if you can't afford to, or if you can't get to a music store over the summer, the best thing to do is to give it a really, really, really good bath, the best you can, and then make sure everything's lubricated. All the slides are lubricated, all of the valves are lubricated, all that stuff, and then put it in the case and leave the case open for a while. Don't close the case. Let the horn air out and that sort of thing, and let the case air out, because over the course of a year, especially if you do marching band, your horn's going to get funky, your case is going to get funky, and you're going to want to let that air out. You can actually spray the insides of cases with Febreze and let them air out. That'll take some of that funky smell down. And tuba players, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, great. And finally, let's discuss some repairman repairs. I think we already hit on it a little bit, but what are some typical repairs that someone like you could do on the road in a band room? And what are some repairs that you have to take to the shop?
Well, the repairmen can usually do all of the minor stuff, like recorking a clarinet, recorking a mouthpiece, replacing a few pads here and there. I've repadded the entire top joint of a clarinet at Brookwood Middle School one time. Yeah, yes, Jeff Bowen, I'm talking to you. Um, let's see. I've also done you do things like you replace the water key corks. A lot of times you'll have to reset springs on woodwind instruments and also on spit valves, like trombone spit valves. The springs come off pretty often. You've got to learn how to do all that stuff as a repairman. Um, there are some slightly crazier repairs that I've had to do from time to time, like if a valve casing on a trumpet or something like that gets dented and the valve won't work, then they make some tools that I carry with me that will fix that problem. But that's a lot of times that's getting a little crazier when it comes to the type of repair. You repairmen can't do anything with a dented slide on a trombone. There's nothing you can do. You have to send that to the shop. There are very expensive specialty tools that are required to fix a dented slide on a trombone, which is another reason why I come back to please take care of trombone slides. You don't really get into any dent work when you're on the road. Like you can't really take dents out. That's not something you can do. It's really difficult to replace broken springs on like clarinets and flutes and saxophones. That's a really tough job and usually needs to go to the shop. Trying to think of other things that I've come across. Saxophones, if they get dropped in any way or bumped, they can get out of line. And when they do, nothing works. And if that happens, if you come across a saxophone on the road in a school where it seems like nothing's playing right and nothing's sealing, the first thing I'll do is look at the alignment of the horn. And if it's out, I'm like, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. You're going to have to send this to the shop. And the shop has to go through quite a bit of stuff to get that fixed. Trying to think if there's I stay away from the crazy instruments. If you've got a bassoon that has a problem or a contrabass clarinet that has a problem, I'm not even going to touch it. That's one of those where I'm like, that's over my head. I'm taking that to the shop. We're going to let the professionals deal with that.
And I think a lot of it depends on the repair person, right? And what they are comfortable doing. If you're not comfortable, like you're saying, you probably won't do it, right?
Yeah, and I'm a little more adventurous than some of my colleagues are. Some of my colleagues just won't, unless it's something super simple. They're not going to do it. They'll just say you need to take it to the shop. I have a lot of band directors friends that are younger that are like, man, I don't want to send this to the shop. I want to fix this, and so I'll often dive in a little deeper than some of the other guys will. But I also know when I get in over my head.
Right.
Yeah.
A question from a student: how many instruments do you service per semester as a road guy and in the shop?
Per semester so as a road guy, meaning like kids that come up to me in a band room.
Yeah.
That's a really hard number. Let's just say, let me break it down to a day. How about that?
Sounds good.
Because I'm not sure I could put a number on an entire semester. I usually fix, let's say I see 6 schools a day, okay? In those 6 schools, I usually fix at least 4 or 5 instruments for each school. So let's say like between, let's say 30 instruments a day. And that could be anywhere from something as simple as your valves are sticky, go put oil on them, to, okay, this is a pretty major repair, go sit down, give me 20 minutes and I'll bring it back to you, sort of thing.
Okay.
Was there a part B to that question?
How many do you see in a shop?
Oh, in the shop. The shop sees about 30,000 instruments a semester. So especially during the summer, because that's when all the schools send in their stuff. We this past summer we did just under 60,000 instruments.
Wow.
It's a lot. That's the reason why we've got a lot of technicians and a lot of hands-on. It's a lot of stuff, especially when every college in the entire state sends you every sousaphone they've got. That gets a bit overwhelming, because Alabama, Auburn, Jacksonville State, Troy, all those groups have like 30 or more tubas in their groups, and so that's a whole lot of sousaphone to be dealing with.
And I'm assuming you would advise not sending them in July 1st if you need them on July 14th.
No, and this is where the road guy should have a little bit of forethought. The best thing to do is send them in and, when you're done with them at the end of May. When you're getting the last 2 weeks of school, the band director should already know which instruments they want to send in and already have all of that ready to go. There are some places that obviously have a need for their instruments up through, like, let's say June 1st. If that's the case, send them in June 2nd, because like you just pointed out, we go through so many during the summer that it's best to just get added to the line and make sure that you're not trying to rush. Inevitably, there's always going to be somebody that's in a rush. That's just part of the business, but you don't want to be that person if you don't have to be.
Right. Besides repairs, what other services can a music store provide to help local band directors, especially things that a young band director may not know?
That's a great question. Your local music store like Gadsden Music, and there are a couple others in the state that do it really well, they can provide almost everything that you need. We've been talking about instruments and tools and things like that, and a road rep that can come visit you every week. But the other things that you can be provided are, if you're a middle school band director, you can get free folders, music folders, which are, I mean, as you know, that's like a gold mine. You can get music. You know, at the Music Educators Association conference that we have every year, we often have over 10,000 titles that you can purchase. And anybody that wants to can come to our store in Gadsden and shop every single piece of music that we've got. And it's a lot. It's an entire room full of music. It's really kind of neat. We also provide, trying to think of all of the different instruments that you need. And when I'm saying, what I'm thinking of, what's coming to mind are all of the little percussion instruments that you never knew that you needed, but your band director inevitably doesn't have, that your band room doesn't have, because either the band's never used one for this piece of music or whatever, or maybe they've gotten broken or walked off or something like that. There are thousands upon thousands of little instruments that you are going to need depending on the repertoire that you choose. When it comes to high school band, really your local music store is kind of your go-to for everything. As you know, because we've done it, we can provide shoes. We can come out, we can do shoe sizing for your band. We can help you with uniform sales. We can help you with your silks for your flags, your flag poles, your color guard, everything that you need for that. Gloves. Again, even the crazy things that we're getting into these days that never were an issue, like PA systems, because now marching band has become electrified, and so now everybody needs some sort of PA system. Things like that. With your long ranger, you know, the headset that you use so that you can speak to your band without having to yell all day long. Those are all things that a music store is able to provide. And not only that, but there's music stores, the ones that do the band and orchestra thing, like Gadsden Music and like Arts Music and a couple others around the area. They are always going to have people there that have different levels and areas of expertise. I personally am a low brass player. I did marching band and drum corps for most of my life. I'm also a guitarist, a bass guitarist, and I also play upright bass as well. I go and I help provide that sort of knowledge for band directors that are like, I have never bought an upright bass before in my life. Well, I get that phone call. So that's something that we can provide as a music store for band directors as well. I don't know anything about that. Let me call my music store and talk to my rep and see what they would suggest.
Right. Can you talk about helping beginning bands with instrument startups and things like that? Now, you might have to break this up what you did before March 2020 and what you guys are doing after. I'm not sure what y'all's policy is on that.
Sure. Well, and like everybody, we're still kind of feeling our way through this pandemic with how to go forward with business, because the way we've always done things, or well, for at least the last couple of decades or so, is we provide a testing event for incoming beginning band members. We obviously work with the band director to come up with which instruments we want to try the kids out on. We come up with which brands and instruments that we would prefer to have in the band room. We come up with a game plan of how to make sure that you are setting your beginning band up for success from the get-go. That's all something that, you know, when we were doing this up until this year, you and I would coordinate that, and then I would show up at your school on a preset date and time with everything that we need. So that would be tester instruments, if depending on the size of the program. If it's a small program, then, you know, maybe myself and the band director can knock out the testing, just the two of us. If it's a large program like Tuscaloosa County, you're going to need several people to help try kids out. You're going to need, you know, you're going to need some high brass people, some low brass people, some woodwind people, both clarinet and flute and saxophone. You'll need a percussion person. So you really, it depends on the size of the program. But you come in, you test the kids on the instruments. And there's many different ways to do that. You can either test them on every single instrument. You can have them choose their top three that they would prefer to play, and then you can only try them on those three. You can not test them on instruments at all. You can test them on just mouthpieces. There are some band directors, and I'm not sure how I feel about this. There are some band directors that won't allow their beginning band members to play percussion. They want their beginning band members to play nothing but a wind instrument for, let's say, the first semester. And then if they aren't liking their wind instrument and they feel like the band director has gotten to know the kid and they feel like they have at least enough rhythm to be able to play the percussion parts, then they'll try out percussion. I'm not real sure how I feel about that. I think that a kid should be able to choose and, you know, get fitted for the right instrument from the beginning. I personally switched. I was one of the ones that switched about 6 weeks into my first year of doing it. But most of the time, you want them to choose something and stick with it, obviously. Now, going forward, what we've talked about with what we're dealing with this year is that you've got to have a much smaller group of people to do everything. And so the band directors have mostly been getting with other faculty members to help them all in the same school system. And they'll have, like, let's say 2 or 3 faculty members. If you have 2 or 3 band directors, that's great. If you're at a small program and there's only band director, then they will usually choose like maybe a color guard sponsor or another teacher that maybe was in band or something like that and has some knowledge of what's going on. And then usually one road rep from the store will be there as well, somebody that has obviously not been sick. And then you schedule all of the kids like one at a time, or you schedule them, you know, maybe no more than 2 at a time or 3 at a time, and you bring them in chunks and you let them go through and just try all the instruments. The key here, obviously, is you have to keep the instruments clean, the mouthpieces, when you're testing. This is something that, you know, you have to be diligent about. Is with brass instruments, you want to make sure that you've got heavy sanitizer. Like the sanitizing spray does a decent job. Rubbing alcohol would be even better. Something like that to just clean the mouthpiece between each kid. And when it comes to woodwind instruments, used to we would just clean the reeds a lot of times. Nowadays you have to use a different reed for every kid, and you've got to clean the mouthpiece and the ligature between each one as well. So it's a little bit more of a drawn out process than it used to be, but it can still be done. If you've got somebody that is quarantined, that can't get out, then most of the time you can kind of, there's no way to test a kid from a distance. It's got to be hands-on. So you can either just kind of give them music theory starting out to learn how to read music, because you can send them all that you want. Or you can just kind of, tell them to wait until this is all over, and then we'll get you in and get you tried out. But that's one of those where if you don't have the child there with their mouth on the mouthpiece trying to make the sound, it's kind of hard to do it.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how this fall is going to go with band directors trying to figure out this instrument testing. I know parents are going to be a lot more concerned with sharing mouthpieces and things like that. So I'm really interested to watch, as I will not have to do it next year. But I just wanted to emphasize that the same points that you did. As a young band director, one of the first things I did was going to the music stores and meeting my road guys. And people that are going to help me out, because not only could they help me through that beginning band instrument tryouts, but they helped me put together that list. And I said, I want this book with this cleaning supplies, with this instrument. And so when the parents go and they have the sheet of paper that I gave them and they really don't know, it's nice for the guy on the other side of the desk to know exactly what I want and what I want my kids to come back with.
That's a very, very important point. Good job. That I completely forgot about that. But yeah, as a young band director, making sure that you not only have made contact with your local music store and your local rep, but like you said, give them the list of what you want. This is the book I use. These are the supplies I want them to have. These are the brands of instruments that I would prefer them to have. That having a list in each one of our stores, we have 3 stores, and each one of them keeps a binder with printouts of every single school. So when a parent walks in and they say, we're from Tuscaloosa, sorry, what's the middle school that feeds Tuscaloosa County High School?
One of them is Eccles.
Eccles, right, with Mr. Cadell. So when the parent from Eccles comes into our store, we can flip the book open, bam, here's what Mr. Cadell said he wants for y'all to have. And then the parent goes, oh, well, now there's no guesswork. So that's really important, absolutely.
Right. Okay. What is the craziest repair or thing you never thought you would see that has come across?
Well, I mean, that's a hard question to answer, because I've seen a lot of crazy stuff. I've seen trumpets that have been stepped on or run over by vehicles, and believe it or not, most of the time they can be fixed. I had a student bring me a tenor saxophone one time, right? I mean, I'm talking the band was on the stage getting ready to perform, and the nothing about that horn played correctly. And in about 2.5 minutes, I was able to make about 90% of that horn play. So I felt like that was an achievement right there. Just from adjustments all the way up and down, just making adjustments as quick as I could. The probably the craziest thing, and this is again, I'm because I know him fairly well and I've spent some time with him. Jeff Bowen runs a fantastic program, and he was in the warm-up room for MPA one year, and he walked up to me with his first chair French horn player, and her trigger on her horn was just completely locked up. And like, this is a child that takes very good care of her instruments. And so there was, between when they left the school, put the instrument on the bus, got off the bus, opened the case, and came in to warm up, something had jammed that valve up. And there's a couple of little tricks that you can do to try to free things up like that. But this horn just wasn't having it. So warm up for MPA is usually what, like maybe 20 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
In the last 10 minutes, I popped that valve out of that instrument, got everything working, and put back together again, and handed it to her as they were walking out of the room. I felt like that was an achievement. Like, that right there was, okay, I just saved this guy's first chair French horn player from not being able to play most of her book because she wouldn't be able to switch sides of the horn. So that was a neat one.
Well, Rich, I think we covered anything. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you. It's good to see a friendly face again. And I wish all of your students, all the brass methods people at Alabama, lots of luck, not with just getting through this pandemic and learning what we need to do to get through it, but once it's all over, getting back to it and getting into the band room and being a good band director.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time. It was good to catch up with you again.
Absolutely. Let's do this again soon.